You're listening to Ecosysteming, the podcast redefining economic development through the lens of equitable entrepreneurship, 2 decades in the making. Join NC Idea's Tom Rue as he engages with entrepreneurs and experts who are challenging the status quo and driving lasting change.
Welcome, listeners, to NC Idea's Ecosysteming podcast, where we meet with very important and influential people in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, economic development space that we claim. And today, boy, do we live up to that billing and promise. I have the incredible good fortune to be joined by Nicola Corzine, founding CEO and executive director of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. Nicola, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, Tom, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure and delight to be here. Trust me.
We just kind of recently, I think, discovered each other, like in the last maybe couple of years. And when I say each other, I don't mean you and I personally, but our respective organizations. I think toiling away in obscurity for about almost 10 years now, we finally kind of cracked one of your research filters that we made a mark on that, what we're trying to do, equity first in the state of North Carolina. I know that's important to your center. I mean, the mission is to improve access and knowledge in entrepreneurship to advance economic progress for all. And if memory serves, you're doing that through 3 primary pillars of, programmatic, research, and policies. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. Perfect summary. We never aimed to sort of enter into research first. We always aimed to enter into how do we support more under-resourced founders getting the support that they deserve on the journey that is the hardest one of all, perhaps, in entrepreneurial success and progress. But there were a number of elements that continue to rise, including around regional innovation, which I know we'll get into today, that said, okay, we need to sink our teeth into a little bit here and see what more needs to be on the horizon and visible in support of those entrepreneurs who are struggling and honestly also advancing. And we need to connect these 2 lanes together in a way that wasn't always visible for others to learn from and grow from. And as you've talked about, there are some states that are doing really, really well and should be celebrated for the progress and the opportunities that are creating capacity and opportunity for a wider array of entrepreneurs, including North Carolina. So here we are, and we'll get into some of that today, I know.
And I want to get into all of that, but just before we do, I have a background. Obviously, we're a private foundation. Before being here, I was 7 years vice president of entrepreneurship at the Kauffman Foundation. So, understood what it's been like to have a lot of resources, which is frankly about the only thing I miss from those days, because it does give you some leadway. So if I may ask, what was the thinking of NASDAQ? Like, first of all, I'm assuming you're a public charity?
Yeah, great question. We are a 501c3 ourselves, so we're an independent nonprofit, but fortunate to be very, very well supported from incredible foundations, including NASDAQ. In fact, NASDAQ seeded us with a $12 million grant at our establishment, really with that mission, as you've perfectly articulated, to advance access and knowledge and entrepreneurship for all. And, we'll maybe talk a little bit about my background, but I too came from a well-resourced environment, having done the entrepreneurial and startup journey myself a few times. I'd moved over at that stage to co-leading the Band of Angels, which is the oldest angel investment group, and had been part of the incredible learning journey of establishing the Angel Capital Association, started out of Kauffman Foundation and
Sure did.
a number of other things, and saw sadly too often how location really was the dividing line of support for talent. And yet, if we think about all that's at stake economically, certainly from a mobility and a generational wealth creation, if we didn't solve the problem of making sure great talent had access to great support, we weren't doing all that we needed to in the entrepreneurial opportunity sphere. And certainly as we think about the imperative of the innovation economy right now, I would say it's one of the most critical factors that we all share in common is how do we make sure great talent has access to the resources. So, long story short, when there was an opportunity that NASDAQ had created to really build a nonprofit that could change all of that, I thought that name NASDAQ could mean so much and do so much good out there. And it's not every day, as you know, that you get a funder that says, here's the check to make that happen. Now go forward and do that. And of course, we're so lucky these days to have incredible foundations and others that support the mission. 93 cents of every dollar we raise goes straight out to the entrepreneurial support system out there. And we aim to do as much as possible and make sure we leave no entrepreneur behind in the process.
It's curious. We can't ignore the current moment. I should say for the listener, we do a little pregame before we hit record, and we established that we had some shared background and experiences, and kind of came up through the system around the same time. Although looking at this young woman on my screen, I must be decades older, so I think I got a much earlier start on it. But you know, we are aligned by the values of equity first. I mean, that's our North Star here, and I think that was part of what garnered the interest of NASDAQ. But we can't ignore the current times we're in. I mean, there seems to be policy wise and very intentional disenfranchisement of things like this, like devaluing of it. I don't want you to. I mean, obviously, we're as a PF nonprofits, we're not supposed to. We're not C6s, so we can't really advocate for specific policy. But I think our First Amendment is still safe and in check to at least have an opinion as to what's going on. Is this the new normal? And I'll lead the witness and say, I don't think it is. I think this too shall pass, because I've been doing this long enough to know this kind of entrepreneurship for everyone. That the world's greatest natural resource is the entrepreneurial potential of everyone. I think that genie has been long out of the bottle, right? So I don't see it getting pushed back in, but I don't think there's enough people pushing back hard enough right now on that. And now I'll be quiet so that the listener can hear a better informed opinion on that.
It's such an important moment in time, I think, for all of us to come together and realize that the greatest equalizer and opportunity statement can be found through entrepreneurship. It's in our DNA. It's in this nation's blood. It's in what called people to find this great place home, including myself as an immigrant entrepreneur, and for so many others. And as we think about unifying what lies ahead, the value of that dollar has the value of the dollar to be available for all. And so if we think of any entrepreneur from any background being able to start and grow a business, those dollars will fuel our communities, the communities that all of us are blessed to call home, and the places and spaces that we raise a family and that we know and love to matter so much to us. And if we don't invest in the people that make that investment in us, then we have disinvested from our nation, and we have been disinvested in the opportunity stakes that all of us have a very highly vested interest in. And so I think now more than ever, I would encourage us to see this as a bipartisan critical moment where we must invest in the rise of all, because if we don't, then we leave everyone behind in that process.
If you can find optimism in a bipartisan effort, what are you smoking, and can you share some?
Well, I will say, maybe to dovetail a little bit into the research, I think one of the findings that we were fascinated by. So Venture Equity Project looked at the states that were outperforming other places and spaces, and we said, okay, we want to understand quality of life effects. We want to understand opportunity sets for Black, women, Hispanic entrepreneurs. And we want to see what is showing up in places that are outperforming others. And we also need to look at the influence of policy around there. And Penn State University, who's one of our research leads, we had Penn State University in Heartland Ford. Penn State University evaluated 1.4 million bills, bless them. And in that 1.4 million bills that they parsed through that have had an effect on entrepreneurship, it was exactly even. I shouldn't say exactly even, 49-51.
Close enough.
Close enough. You'll indulge if I say in that level, but truly equal. So I think what we can find is this recognition that without entrepreneurship, nobody wins. with entrepreneurship, economic progress is possible and an imperative for all of us to lean into. So maybe it can be the thing that causes us to close the divide that feels so front and center right now for many of us, and certainly for our entrepreneurs. Above all else, I do want to take a moment to, not Pollyanna the reality that for our founders, this is like the third winter that they've been on, if you'll indulge, and it's a long and a hard road. And there is more complexity perhaps than ever before from a decentralized environment to, like, how do we navigate all of these very what feels like geopolitical, understandably, moments of loss and uncertainty for founders. And so, no matter if you're the incredible micro entrepreneur to the tech forward entrepreneur, we want to appreciate the investment that you're still making in this very difficult journey, and also recognize deeply the length of time that you've been on this hard and enduring environment that we've asked you to go on over the last many, many years.
Yeah, not surprisingly, I concur. I think, and this is actually, I'm going to lead the witness on a question I have teed up for you, like, namely, what do elected officials misunderstand about entrepreneurship? I think to speak to some of these decisions, right? The doging, if I can turn that into a verb or whatever, whether it's EDA grants, right, or NSF engine. Like, we have two engines in North Carolina. These engines, $150 million effort, over a decade. There are so many interdependencies, right, with so many other positive implications, right? Like, so we've tied in a research, effort, a commercialization effort. It'll feed dozens and dozens of entrepreneurial opportunities and research projects and partnerships where the I actually serve as the board chair on the textile engine. And, we're trying to redefine circularity at a global scale with this and revitalize this small industry that the Southeast had for a little bit of time. And so when something like that is just like arbitrarily cut with the snap of a finger, it's not just, the termination for convenience on the contract amount. It cascades throughout an entire economy, and in our case, throughout the entire state, because we are focused on a statewide ecosystem effort, and we have funded hundreds of players from the mountains to the coast. And I think the technical term I have for that when I see that is, it really pisses me off. And I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. Like, if you truly understand this, right, why are you allowing it to happen?
No, I really appreciate that, Tom. I think, looking at the ecology of entrepreneurship has always been a challenge. It's been one of the reasons why we'll often lament there's still much investment that happens around the first mile of entrepreneurship and not enough continuity of investment in the success pathways for entrepreneurial progress. Our patience in entrepreneurship is often measured in months, not years or decades. And yet, in these moments, we don't see the full effect of what shifts when we disinvest or we get out of, quote unquote, a priority industry, or we even stop seeding, support at our institutions, our universities, et cetera, where a lot of radical innovation may be born from. And so I think for a number of these elements, it's hard. We've seen this with emerging managers as an example where, you know, states are empowered to be able to fund first time fund managers, and the states want to do what's right, but they're not necessarily provided the tools or the support systems to train the people that are making the decisions on to know how to support those emerging managers in the best of ways too. And so I think a lot of our policymakers aim to want to do right, but the ability to sequence data to inform and guide them on the decisions that they're making is really tough. It's really challenging, and a lot of the knowledge leaves with a really good peer. Like, for every great Tom that may be within a region, if and when Tom is managed to, like, go on to, retiring, quote unquote, whatever that looks like, and whatever permeation of joining 6 other incredible boards and or moving somewhere else, we lose that knowledge stack that lives with an individual. And I think our progression of being able to learn what is working and what isn't working in radical experimentation around entrepreneurship is a struggle in our nation. It does often feel sometimes like we're like, didn't we read about this, that we tried this like 10 years ago? Why are we doing the same?
Deja vu all over again.
Exactly. Groundhog Day for sure. Um, and I think the opportunity in front of all of us is to not just sit back on our laurels and go, oh, well, it's difficult, data's siloed. It's so hard to figure this out. We should just focus on the new and the now instead of invested in the long term and the duration of sustained entrepreneurship and the progress of all communities rising through this lens of economic progress.
Yeah, well, not surprisingly, you're preaching the choir. I mean, at Kauffman, they had the longitudinal firm formation survey that had spun over, I think it was close to 1,000 peer-reviewed papers over the span of 20 years, just because they were investing in a data set, right? And that the importance of that. Then the other irony is you were talking, and of course I agree, but then isn't it also ironic that you look at your organization, you look at our organization, you look at organizations like Kauffman, that institutional knowledge could be resident within federal and state halls and agencies, but this work is being done by nonprofits,
I know. I know.
private foundations, right? Like I take calls all the time from people in other states saying, how did North Carolina get an NC idea? Because our model in particular, the funding that we give directly to founders, it's non-dilutive. It's not debt. It is free money. So short of Auntie Nicola writing me a check with no expectation of ever getting paid back, there's no better money on the street, right? To say nothing of the fact that we have the entire capital stack that support us in this work. And so we are kind of like deal source for the ones that rise, to the top. And it's very fortuitous and it's intentional. It's the way it should work. But we're not a government agency. I don't get funding from the state. I don't get funding from the feds. Ironically, try as we may with EDA dollars, especially fund to funds, the fact that our money was non-dilutive disqualified us for it. And we have an exceptional representative at the EDA here, a woman named Hillary Sherman. And for years, we've been trying to conspire for a way for us to deploy capital on behalf of EDA. Mm. And if our grants did go in as debt or equity, we would qualify for the funding. But because we give it to these funders in need, and they are over 80% are historically underserved by our definition, that somehow is foreboding. We can't do it. And that'll be a head scratcher until those days that I do retire, which hopefully is not anytime in the near future, but it's crazy. And I don't know. I feel like you and I are kindred spirits. Sorry, I don't mean to insult you by saying that, but for me, I take it as I'll take that lead way. And it's nice when I get a chance to talk to somebody that understands the real nuance and the minutia of this work that we do, the good, the bad, and the crazy, or the batshit crazy, I would say. And there is some of that. There definitely is some of that.
No, I agree. And I think, the challenge, and this is why the work and learning from North Carolina has been such a critical part of this. There are many kindred spirits that are looking up and going, how do I do the same, Tom, maybe in my region or in my location? I'm not sure. Like there's one or two influencers that attest to change, that are deeply committed to creating more capacity and opportunity within their regions. And being able to pattern match or learn from others in a peer collaboration system has just been hard. It's been hard in this field. It's not that we ever meant to create a cottage industry, quite the contrary. But when we started the center 10 years ago, there were 4,500 accelerators and incubators in the United States alone at that time. And everyone had their own sort of style and interpretation of what was needed. And we were all trying to do the best that we could with the limited resources that we have. And now I think the opportunity is to learn from experimentation, certainly not curtail that experimentation, but not just step and repeat time and time again, but really hold ourselves accountable for changing opportunities and outcomes for a wider array of communities that are raising a hand saying, we want to do that here too. How do we learn? How do we connect? How do we make sure that we can rise and thrive? Because our entrepreneurs, while proud of the communities, while deeply invested in their communities, are doing business nationally. And so we must invest in their success on that same scale if we're going to support them in the ways that they deserve to be.
Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying, and sharing that. That's part of what we're doing here. We're writing the playbook. I'd like to say, perhaps a little bit arrogantly, that we're redefining economic development, at least in my view, what it should be. I'm hopeful. I'm starting to see slight promising trends that this notion of, oh, big giant international company, here's 500 million in tax breaks and incentives. Please build a building in our state, right? Where PS, the ROI in this state is called the JDIG credits. They get the most obnoxious of them get over 30 years for the payback. So
Wow.
they can take that long. And what do you think if you did a postmortem on any of these deals? Do they ever pay out where promised?
I'm guessing the IRR may not be as impressive.
No, right? And then over here, we have this job creation engine hiding in plain sight, right? And that's again one of those frustrations. And so I'll use our own portfolio, right? We started focusing on ecosystem in 2017 and putting millions of dollars and hundreds of grants, finding these people that were specifically helping underserved, really elevating this notion that, starting and growing a company is an option for me, because in so many of these communities, yeah, I mean, if you have to see it to be it and you don't see it, then you're not going to be it, right? And so that was 2018. In 2019, startups, excuse me for referring to my notes here, the startups in North Carolina was kind of around the baseline of 100,338. By 2020, that was up to 126,624. And before anybody listening says, oh, the asterisk 2020, it's the COVID year. Yes, we got it. There was the necessity entrepreneurship, bump. And we saw it too. So 2021, we went from 126,000 up to 178,000, a all-time record for the state. 2022, 171,376. 2023, 171,730. This is more than the COVID bump, right? We have found a sustaining model in North Carolina, and I do have hot off the presses from the Secretary of State. The 2024 numbers, we took a slight dip. I think it's either 168 or 163. I can't read my own writing. That's another topic. But we're kind of normalizing and baselining this now, and we have a statewide ecosystem that they still have their nuances. We don't sit in the heart of the triangle, which is a great innovation tech hub, entrepreneurship hub in and of itself. But we don't sit here and presume to tell Western North Carolina, especially Western North Carolina with the recovery efforts from Helene, or down east, as we say, we don't presume to tell them what they need to do in their ecosystem. We say, show us that you know what your constituents need, and we'll help build your capacity to do that. And then we convene around the values that we all share. We share those things that are helpful to one another and learn from each other. And then we continue to evolve the conversation, right? What more can we do? How can we better serve?
And I think that shared mindset is really what creates transformative and long-lasting change within these communities, as it's not a prescriptive approach. It's not pretending to come in top down and say, oh, well, here you go. There's your playbook. All your problems will disappear. Rainbows and unicorns will emerge forevermore. It's much more this recognition that each place has got incredible resources, incredible opportunities, and some challenges. And the ways in which we address those challenges are based on deeply understanding the lived experience of those entrepreneurs and listening first and applying support systems where relevant, where helpful, and where needed. And not assuming that just because it worked over here, it's going to magically happen over in this other place too. So again, I think there's this, I don't want to call it non-informed prescriptive approach, because obviously we are learning and building and quite literally building and flying that engine at the same time. But I think our hope is to say, as we've learned from, NCIDEA and so many other partners on this journey at the Venture Equity Project, there are some times when you need to just listen deeply to what is needed within locations and support them in the ways that they're asking for. And that may move and that will change over time based on what's working and what's not working. Entrepreneurship is perhaps one of the most dynamic, ever moving environments. And so being able to also just pause and reflect and listen and learn and grow and change, this constant iteration around the entrepreneurial support system is one of the secret sauces that definitely emerged in our study last year.
Yeah, and that's basically our game plan. You can this work can be thwarted by a couple of things that I kind of tongue in cheek referred to. First, the curse of good intentions. So there's a fair number of people that really mean in organizations that mean really well, but if we're being brutally honest, are probably not qualified to lead some of this work. They could have a support role for sure, but sometimes and to their credit, because they did have the courage to raise their hand and nobody else did, so they get tasked, right? But what we have is a lead in a role that they're not optimally suited for, and that complicates the things. And then the funding side of the equation, it's the assumption of complete knowledge. And this is something I learned at a very large Kansas City-based foundation, right? That we have the money, therefore we must know. And you can force grantees into unholy yoga poses because they're desperate. They need the money, right? And it was funny, like the first ecosystem partner grant RFP we put on the street, I got a call from an applicant. And he said, there's a mistake on your RFP. And I said, okay, what's the mistake? He said, it's only 2 pages long. And I was like, that's no mistake, right? I'm not going to prescribe. Hell, I'm not even from North Carolina. I'm just a kid from Cleveland, a first generation kid from Cleveland, Ohio. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You know your region better than I. So just help me fall in love with your mission, and then we'll do what we can to support your capacity, but we'll hold you accountable too, right? That's the other part. We are very data-driven here. We manage the whole organization like a startup with the EOS operating system. We have contracts, we have expenditure responsibility. I mean, we're a nonprofit that gives money to for-profit things. That is a sticky wicket. I mean, the IRS tried to close us down 3 years ago for that. And that's a story for another time, but we prevailed. Spoiler alert, we're still here.
No, I love that. I mean, I think measuring and having these KPI driven approaches in entrepreneurship, it's important. I think it does become a bit of a challenge because you get the head and the heart that sometimes conflict with one another. And as we've talked about, I wouldn't say that we've figured out all the right measures of entrepreneurial health in ecologies. I think that's still a work in progress, if you'll indulge. But we have to start somewhere, and we start by knowing the improvements of job creation, of wealth creation, of businesses formed, of enduring businesses, of growth-based businesses, of ensuring that we're not just over-indexing to one sector without the right investment that carries us forward in market conditions like we're in right now. All of these things matter and prevail in the duration of success, if you will, of a region, so that you're not just a moment in time, but you're a movement of sorts. And I think our states that have emerged, including clearly North Carolina, are on that trajectory of saying, we're not only going to measure, we're going to make sure that we have KPI-driven innovation statistics that matter to all stakeholders involved and invested in this progress, and that we're going to continue to refine them. And as we are making, clear changes in what's working and what's not working, we're going to bring that back into the model, and that model is going to continue to inform us of where we head next. And that strategic direction is so important, I think, when you're setting a clear goal of being an innovation-driven market, and one that's guided by entrepreneurs at the heart.
I think that's the one that also resonated when I got to go up to DC last year for your event. And the KPI, I think that's one differentiator in those of us in this space that are kind of playing chess, at a higher level, because I think we come with the benefit of understanding history, and again, a lot of well-intended work in this space, but like if it's not moving the needle, then let's take very limited resources and apply them differently. So you're off to a great run, 10 awesome years starting and founding this organization. What is your hope for the next 10? Like, is it redefining what economic development means? Is it increasing the prioritization at the national dialogue level? Are we going to have senators that, can debate on the floor the merits of a safe?
That I'd pay to see. For us, it's really about the heart of making sure that we're not leaving any entrepreneur behind. So right now we have the benefit of supporting 105,000 entrepreneurs, and I think it's similar to you. You know, the investment that's made in us from incredible foundations. We look at it and we're like, this is good. Now, how do we go further? And not only how do we go further, but how do we learn from others who are doing this radical experimentation in such important ways, so that we don't leave any entrepreneur behind. The one equation that we always hold ourselves accountable to more than anything else is the fact that there are only 24 hours in a day. And no way are we ever going to change that dynamic. So how do we ensure that every hour that an entrepreneur is investing in themselves for the value of their business is going as far and as wide as possible? And that same mentality is going to the ESOs, the entrepreneurial support organizations that invest in them, the policymakers who want to do the best that they possibly can in the tenure that they have to make decisions on behalf of their stakeholders, including business owners that are in their communities. And I think we're not yet there. And so, we hear rural regions, we hear the challenges of entrepreneurs still trying to figure out who to connect with, how to connect in the ways that they want to, how to grow from $500,000 in revenue to $1 million in revenue. And it's still very hard for them to grow and scale businesses in the ways that they want to. But I feel that, it's no longer about, does the knowledge exist? Now it's, how do we really ensure that the value of that knowledge is being disseminated to entrepreneurs and the mechanisms that make the most sense to them, and that people are able to action insights, research findings, great leadership like at NC Idea in the ways that can really manifest the change that they're looking for. So it's almost more of an indexing and discovery problem that we're facing than an actual original content problem. And I think the good news is now with tools, technologies, and with people power, we have a chance to actually solve that in the next decade ahead and really make sure that we are serving up entrepreneurial resources and support systems much more intentionally that create a vibrant community of support for all. And when we do that, we're going to have new markers of measured outcomes that matter. And we're not just going to call it about revenue or job growth. We're going to have a much more holistic approach to the value of entrepreneurship. And I promise you, it's going to become even more relevant that this is no longer a one-party issue or a tensionized issue, but everyone is going to lean in much more to the shared innovation economy that we all benefit from when everybody participates in that process.
Well, amen to that, sister, because if there's one thing both parties can rally around, it is entrepreneurship. I mean, it's not partisan, for goodness sakes. And, helping people become, economically independent, strengthening the communities that they grow these companies in. I mean, what's the argument against that, for goodness sakes? Right? Like, how can you not be for that? It'd be like being against like puppies and, summer rain. So, well, I appreciate everything you shared. I really look forward to the good work that's coming out of the center. I also need to say thank you. I couldn't be happier that, like I said, we cracked your radar. I promise you, we're working fastidiously on things that are, hopefully worthy of attention. Everything we do, we look at it from an entrepreneurial standpoint, like how replicable is it? That this playbook we're putting together, there's something for every state in the nation to do this. We're going to tell that story, but partners like you help us tell that story. And so thank you for that.
Well, thank you for being such an inspiration for so many and for helping us learn even more deeply what it takes to not only build, but continue to invest and create more opportunity in the field of equity and entrepreneurship for all. So thank you for inspiring. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us. And we can't wait to continue to follow, raise awareness, and showcase all the amazing entrepreneurs in North Carolina too.
Stay connected with NC Idea on LinkedIn and Facebook, and subscribe to our newsletter for all the latest as we celebrate our 20th year. Catch new episodes of Ecosysteming every other Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in and being a part of this thing of ours.